Okay, Chris, away to you. I'm just going to let you tell us a bit about yourself.
There's a very interesting echo.
There is, isn't there?
Echo. Oh, you muted. Okay, brilliant. So, okay, right. Yes, hello everyone, and thank you very much for coming tonight. In case you haven't already gathered, my name's Chris Bonnello. I'm an autistic advocate and also formerly a primary school teacher. And for now, I'm a teacher in an autism-specific school as well. Leaving teaching forever for a second time in a few months, but that's largely because Autism Not Weird is going so well. And I should probably tell you what Autism Not Weird actually is for those who don't already know. After I left teaching forever the first time, I should clarify, that was when I left mainstream teaching. I later ended up kind of sleepwalking back into teaching after I did autism-specific out-of-school tuition, and one contact led to another, and before I knew it, I'd accidentally ended up being a teacher again, except in special education, which was probably where my career should have been all along. But yeah, after I left teaching forever the first time, I decided that the lifestyle choice of getting anxious and failing job interviews for a living just really wasn't suiting me. So I decided to tell the whole internet I was autistic and kind of see what happened next. And so my Asperger's syndrome, as it was diagnosed back then, it was a very closely guarded secret way up until April 2015, and took a bit of a gamble, but it paid off. And now I get to call myself an award-winning writer and an international speaker and a multiply published novelist. And that wasn't really the plan. I wasn't really planning on having that many people reading my stuff, but I'm really massively grateful to have some kind of voice in this massive awareness acceptance drive that's been going on these last 5-10 years. Well, probably a lot longer than that, really, but it's really become big and in the public eye over the last 5-10 years. And yeah, very glad that the neurodiversity movement is doing what it's doing. So yeah, that's my part in it. I'm an autistic guy who's a teacher of autistic students, and I advocate publicly delivering speeches and training sessions about how best to meet the needs of autistic people.
Fabulous. And let's get into teaching first.
Okay.
You might want to talk about Rubik cubes as well at some point. But let's get into teaching first. And if you could talk about what are some of the highlights of teaching?
Okay, I suppose I could translate that question as what am I going to miss most about teaching? And so I think most people would agree in my position that it's the people that you miss the most. Even in mainstream primary school teaching, I really valued the people who I knew, staff, young people. They were brilliant. Experiences may differ, terms and conditions apply, etc., etc. It's not that way for a lot of people in mainstream teaching, but in my case, it really was. It was just the system that seemed to have been built without autistic teachers in mind. But yeah, missing the people is particularly the case for the school that I work in now. I spent the last 3 years building up some pretty effective relationships with the students, and the staff are the kind of staff that's, it feels a bit daft saying this given the work in an autism-specific school, but the kind of staff that it feels completely safe to be your authentic autistic self in front of. And if I need to just mess around with a Rubik's Cube while I'm teaching a maths lesson, they're like, oh yeah, that helps them concentrate. If something is bothering me in the background, there's no, oh, well, that's a bit autistic. That basically, even though to my knowledge, I do have some suspicions about other people, but to my knowledge, I'm the only autistic person open, but I certainly am the only openly autistic staff member in the school. Everyone seems to just get it, which is great. So that's one thing that I miss. And that, yeah, the highlights are the people, and also how extremely funny people can be, especially young people, especially young autistic people whose brains are not kind of constrained by, you know, the way we're supposed to be, which gets drilled into you as you get older.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, yeah, we'll go from highlights to the next question, which is,
Oh, I wonder what that's going to be.
what are the things that you'd most like to change about the education system? And I'm giving you full reign here. Could be small things, could be impossible dreams.
Okay.
Oh dear, he has to take a drink to answer this one.
Yes. So, the biggest problem with mainstream education is the fact that it's built with everyone else in mind. And that's actually, by extension, a problem with the world in general. A lot of autistic people I know, including myself, would say that the toughest part of being autistic isn't really to do, well, in some cases, your experience may differ, etc., but in a lot of cases, it's not really autism itself that's the difficult part of autism. Is the fact that everyone else is not autistic. If 98% of people thought like me, then guess who'd have the disorder? But yeah, living in a world that's built with the non-autistic population minds, that's quite difficult. And it extends to school as well. I was just telling a group of Senkos in a talk I delivered yesterday about how primary schools are filled with really bright colours because all children love bright, vibrant colours, and full of noisy playgrounds because all children love making noise. And oh, we got a surprise for you this afternoon because all children love surprises without any exception at all. And wait, what do you mean you're not enjoying yourself? This is special. You should be enjoying it. It's your moral responsibility to enjoy, and so on and so on. And yeah, even though, again, I have positive memories of the people who I met in mainstream education, I think they're just as much prisoners of the system as I was. There is a lot that needs changing about the way it's designed. I'm not quite going to use the phrase unfit for purpose when it comes to mainstream school teaching, because it does do some good for some people, and I appreciate what it's trying to do, but, well, you can't really sing the song and dance of, oh, isn't it great that we're all different, and oh, diversity is wonderful. But no, everyone needs to learn multiplication using this method, and everyone needs to sit still in assembly, and so on and so on. So yeah, talking specifically about mainstream, I think it would need changing from the ground up. So what would it change about? Oh yeah, and something that is very important, and this just as much applies to specialist education as mainstream education: more money. Now, normally I'm not a very money-centered person, but I and half the staff at a school I used to work in all lost our jobs when the school mysteriously found itself more than £500,000 in deficit. And officially, nobody knows how that happened. But then the senior staff came up with this forward-thinking initiative that would raise standards or some rubbish that just happened to involve doubling the class sizes and halving the staff. Now, this was a school for people with complex disabilities and very profound learning disabilities, and basically teenagers who are very fast with no sense of danger. Just about the last school that you would want to double the class sizes and half the staff. But we were told, oh, don't worry, it's all for the data points. Sorry, I mean students. So yeah, I have seen what happens to very good schools when the money runs out. So if there were a magic money tree, well, personally I think there is a magic money tree. I think it's in the corporate tax evasion forest. But leaving that whole political issue to one side, I think having enough money to accommodate people would be the best thing, because in my experience, a lot of, I know it's not the same everywhere, but most of the teachers who I've known would love to be able to meaningfully accommodate autistic children, dyslexic children, and to give all of the provisions because they love the kids. Obviously they do, but we'll have to see where the budget lies. So yeah, building the system from the ground up would need more money than the government would be willing to give. But failing that, more special schools.
Okay, well, the next question kind of follows on from that, although maybe you might have covered it slightly, but the next question is, do you think inclusive education is achievable in mainstream?
With enough money, yes. And trying to find a polite way of saying it, because like I said, my personal experience tells me that if someone doesn't know how to accommodate an autistic student, it's not necessarily because they're ignorant or they want everyone to conform to us. Sometimes they might just honestly not know how to accommodate. They might have been given training from outdated textbooks written in the 1990s and not actually heard any autistic voices about it. It's rare that you find a teacher who actually does not want to accommodate children who think differently, although I'm sure they are out there. But could meaningful inclusion exist in mainstream education? Well, if the willpower is there, if the training is there for the teachers, and unfortunately, perhaps borderline most importantly, if the money is there as well.
Okay, maybe there might be some questions from the audience about that later, maybe. But let's move on at the moment. So we're going to talk about one of your other careers is as a novelist. Can you tell us what inspired you to write the Underdog series, and what has been standout moments of authoring books about neurodivergent characters? I've got one here that I can show, if I don't know if you've seen that properly. And actually, we're going to give this away, and this is a signed copy that Chris signed for me, and we're going to give this away to somebody who is attending tonight. So I will record all of the chat. So if you want to win it, you need to make sure that you've been in the chat. And I'll be able to, actually, you probably need to give your permission that I can email you from Eventbrite as well, actually. But I'm sure you won't mind if you're going to win a book.
Bear in mind that the book being given away is the third book of the series. So if you want access to the first two, get in contact with me, because I have ebooks. So, yeah. Okay, so I should probably start by explaining what exactly Underdogs even is. So it's the near future, and the whole of Britain has been imprisoned in these giant walled cities, and they're under the watchful eye of 1 million cloned soldiers. And only 13 people remain free in the abandoned British countryside, trying to fight back with, I was about to say small arms, I don't quite mean that, like small firearms, and basically it's very small makeshift guerrilla army trying to fight against a substantial amount of cloned soldiers. So yeah, 13 against 1 million, guess who wins? Well, I'm obviously not giving away the end of the series, but I've written it in a way that the 13 at least stand a chance. And the particular twist to this is the fact that 8 out of those 13 people are teenagers who escaped the attack on their special school. So you've got autistic heroes, you've got dyslexia heroes, you've got heroes of ADHD, anxiety, Down syndrome, and loads of other things. And they're the ones fighting to free the people who put them at the bottom of the social food chain. In fact, as it says on the back cover of book 1, after a lifetime of being defined by their weaknesses, the teenagers must learn how to play to their strengths and become the best they can be in a world that has never been on their side. And it's met with a surprising amount of positive feedback from the, well, not just the neurodiversity community, the autism community. It's the second book, Tooth and Nail, actually got a positive review in The Guardian. And that's another one of those sentences that I can't believe they're just said out loud. But and Acceleration, the third book, just came out a few months ago, and that got the exact response I was hoping for. I'm saying nothing beyond that because, well, reasons. And yeah, it's probably about time that I start answering the questions that you actually asked about. What was the first bit? Was it about what inspired me to write this story, and also what the highlights? That was the question, yeah? Have I got that right? You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm muted. That's right, yes.
Okay, cool. Right, so what inspired me to write it was, funnily enough, the Underdog story began as a coping mechanism for unemployment. So it was 2010. I had passed a teaching course, but, well, maybe a rant about the recruitment system is best saved for another question. But basically, I was unemployed. Well, I say unemployed. I had the occasional day of supply teaching here and there, but it was not a particularly happy time in my life. And basically, the only work that I got was when other people decided that I got to work that day. And it was a time in my life when other people got to make the decisions on where my life was going, which led me to subconsciously believe that I wasn't really the important one. Everyone else, the important people at the important side of the interview panel table, they'd be the ones who decide where my life is going. And so writing was brilliant because, and I recommend it to, well, not just all autistic people, everyone who feels like they don't get much of a say in the world that they're in, because in the Underdogs series, I got to decide the rules. I got to decide what happened. Not to sound overly dramatic, but I got to decide who lives and who dies. But yeah, that's one thing that writing has done a lot of for me. But yeah, in those early years, I'd walk down to the pub and have a pub lunch, which wasn't great for my finances, certainly wasn't great for my waistline, but at least it got me out of the house most days. And that was something I found very important. And I just wrote this very silly story about the most mathematically unwinnable war possible. That was basically the challenge I set myself. Write a ridiculously impossible war to win and try to make the underdog side stand a chance. So yeah, that's what inspired me to do it. It was unemployment and a coping strategy for it. But I knew all along it wasn't going to get published. That wasn't really the point. The important point of it was for me to, mentally speaking, keep my head above the water. The fact that 3 of them are published and the 4th one is halfway through its crowdfunding stage is something quite lovely, really. I've now completely forgotten your second question.
The second question was, what have been the standout moments of authoring books with neurodivergent characters?
Well, a few weeks ago, it was World Book Day, and on the same day that I was being invited to a school, another autism-specific school, for my first ever author visit, there was an 11-year-old girl somewhere in England who was going to school dressed as Kate Arrowsmith from Underdogs. And that was, it was incredible. And so I got a photo of this girl dressed up as one of my characters. And yeah, there was that. But also there's fan arts, there's fan fiction out there. I started writing when I was 11-ish, 12-ish years old, writing Sonic the Hedgehog fan fiction. And that kind of evolved into me creating my own characters, writing my own stuff. And it's weird how the circle of life has now gone full circle. And I'm seeing people writing Underdogs fan fiction. It actually exists, it's out there. So yeah, there's that. And once in a while I get a message from someone who says, yeah, my child never tends to read voluntarily, but for the first time, they're seeing themselves represented in a book. Like, this character's just like me. I'm thinking, yes, it's about bloody time.
So that leads on to another question, which is how important do you think it is for representation in books and films and TV shows and other media?
I think it's important for 2 completely separate reasons. And admittedly, I'm basically stealing these insights off this Facebook post that I saw once, but it's entirely true. 2 reasons why representation is important is first of all, it's validating the lived experience of those who very rarely get to see themselves represented. It's like, oh wow, people like me actually get to be the heroes. It's not just down to all those other people, those non-autistic people, those middle-class people, those white people, those boys. It's, wow, people like me can actually be the heroes in the stories. And the other side of it, and this is a bit of the stuff from Facebook post, it's not just them who are seeing it, it's everyone else who's saying, oh wow, autistic people can be the heroes too. Oh yes, non-white, non-male, etc., but they can be the heroes of stories as well, which is something that I think most people do know consciously, that, well, yes, autistic people can be good at stuff, and yes, not every hero has to fit this mold, but actually seeing it and actually learning lessons from those characters, that's something extremely powerful and something we need more of.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to take a little slight detour on the questions now. We'll probably come back to the books later, because I definitely want to ask you who you want to play the lead characters.
Quick pause before we do. I hope you don't mind. I'm noticing a lot of messages in the chat. I have to be honest, I'm not reading the chat right now. Am I?
No, that's fine. We're going to ask all those questions at the end. So
okay, cool. Thank you.
We're gonna definitely finish up at the very latest by 9 o'clock with you just talking to me, and we're going to ask the questions that are in the chat. So, but we might, if a lot of questions come in the chat, then we might abandon my questions before that. That's fine. We can be very fluid tonight. It doesn't matter. We don't have any rules. So a question that we've been asked, or that we are asked quite a lot in our Facebook group, is, should you tell your child that they're autistic? And if so, what's the best way? And I know that we are on the same page on this one. So
well,
go ahead.
Don't mind, but I'm going to turn the question around and ask, why would you not tell your child they're autistic? And I know the counter argument, of course, is, but just in case it makes them feel different. Well, if I could share my screen, I would show you that this graph from the, we're probably going to talk about the Autism Survey in a bit, but one of the questions there was, how much do you agree or disagree with the following statements? One of those statements was, I knew I was different from an early age. And 90% of the autistic respondents replied that, yeah, of course I knew I was different from an early age. I mean, I'm autistic, I'm not stupid. I can tell that other people are different to me. Oh yeah, it's not we're different to other people, it's other people who are different to us. Obviously, because this is my perspective I'm seeing it from, and why is mine less important than other people's? Anyway, so yeah, the counter argument to, well, I don't want to tell my child that they're autistic. Well, I can think of at least two counter arguments. Number one, if you're saying that I don't want them to feel like they're different, there's a 9 in 10 chance they already know that they're different. At least give them a word that helps them to pin all these things on there, helps them to understand, oh, this is why. And oh, so it's not some fault with me, it is literally how my brain is designed and how my brain is supposed to be. And yeah, if you give people a word for their differences, bear in mind that people notice their negative difference a lot more than they notice their positive differences. And yeah, if you explain that, wait, what's the second half of your question? How would you?
What's the best way to
right,
have that conversation?
I'll put an imaginary pin in that and answer that in a bit. But yeah, that's the first argument. So if the children know they're different, then at least let them have a reason why. And the second counter argument to not telling children they're autistic is, at some point they're going to find out. And on the day they do, they will wonder why they were not told. Like a certain relative of mine who I broke the news to that I was autistic, and she wasn't in my literally immediate family, but she responded with, "Oh, I've known you're autistic since you were 6." Like, then why the hell did you not tell me? Why did you keep that from me? What was so bad about me being autistic that it was best kept away from me? He can't know that he's this. Yeah, the autistic children are likely to be perceptive enough as adults or as older children to know, well, to question why they weren't told that they were autistic. So yeah, that's second counter argument. So anyway, that wasn't literally your question. Your question was, should we tell them that they're autistic rather than should we not tell them that, whatever. So my answer to should we tell children they're autistic is, well, yeah, it's their brain, so they automatically have the right to the information. I mean, just from a self-autonomy point of view, it's just quite obvious. But also, learning that you're autistic helps you to make peace with a lot of things that you think are wrong with you. And the explanation of autism is, oh, so I actually am different, but not in a defective way. It really does depend on how you explain autism to them. So I actually wrote a whole article about how to tell your child they're autistic and when to tell them. If you go on autisticnotweird.com/all, then that's basically an index of all of my articles. And in the first section, there's one about how to tell your child they're autistic. So first off, positively. Don't go to them and say, oh, okay, right, I've got some terrible bone-chilling, soul-crushing news for you, because, well, often their attitude to their autism may mirror the attitudes of those around them. And of course, this isn't 100% guaranteed to be the case. You could have some extremely positive parents who tell their children in a complete positive way, but their child ends up seeing as negative, largely because, well, the first thing people learn about autism is that it's supposed to be a bad thing, because they learn it from, well, news websites, they learn it from charity fundraisers and things like that. So, yeah, it's better to tell them positively. And by the way, when I say positively, I don't mean like be pretentious, like, oh, you're autistic, which means you have the best kind of brain in the world. And yeah, even though I may or may not agree with that particular point, but even autistic children can be perceptive enough to know when people are trying to overcompensate for something. So yeah, be completely open and honest about the difficulties of being autistic, but don't let that be the main headline of the conversation. Like, oh yeah, and so it kind of links in this, to the second point I was going to make. Personalize it to them. What I mean is, by way of example, when I told my parents I was autistic, in the first conversation, they didn't believe me. By the end of that conversation, they did. But the reason they didn't believe me was for actually a very positive, Chris-friendly reason. It's because their understanding of autism was this very like tick box checklist of symptoms of autism. They could not reconcile that checklist with the person that they'd known for 25 years by that point. So if you were to tell a young person they're autistic, say, personalize it, say, so you know how you're really good at this, but also you struggle with this. And you know how you find this really difficult, but this is something that helps you with that. A blend of positive things that they deserve to know about and the negative things that they experience every day, so you might as well be honest about it. Blending that together, making it as personal to them as possible. That makes it more likely that they'll say, oh, right, that makes sense, rather than, oh, wait, what do you mean I've got to fit inside this autism box and that's the person I'm supposed to be? So yeah, be positive, yet realistic, and above all, honest. And also personalize it to them as much as possible. As for when to tell them, my opinion has kind of changed over the years. I used to think once they start feeling negatively about their differences, that's when you tell them. That's no longer my opinion. Partly because I can no longer think of a reason that justifies not telling someone they're autistic, but also because I found out I was autistic when things were pretty bad for me, and I did end up being, well, quite well known for being a positive autism advocate, but I spent lots of time being quite negative about my autism because that was a reflection of where I was at the time. But it was worth that little dip in self-esteem at the start for the growth in self-esteem that followed. But no, these days I think once someone understands that they're different, well, why wouldn't you just tell them then? In fact, it has to be said, it's a long time ago now, but we had a discussion about this on Autistic Not Always Facebook page. And you've got two people in the waiting room, by the way, just to let you know. I had this discussion on Autistic Not Always Facebook page about when do you think is the best time to tell children they're autistic. And some of the best answers that I got were from the parents who said, well, we were fortunate enough for our child to be diagnosed when they were 2. So it's just never been a secret. We've never had that sit down, we need to talk about your brain kind of talk. It's just always been just generally part of the discussion. Like right from the age of 3, they just know, yeah, I'm autistic. So it really depends on your circumstance. If you don't find out until the child is 10, then, well, unless you have an extremely good reason, just to, oh yeah, one of those extremely good reasons might be you're still kind of learning about it for yourself. But generally speaking, sooner than you think.
Yeah, I'm with you completely. I'm with you completely there. I mean, one of the difficulties for the cohort of of people that tend to be in our Facebook group is many of them have girls that don't find out until they are in crisis. And of course, that's a difficult time, you know, because then the autism diagnosis really is kind of associated with that crisis. So
yes.
can you think of a way to make that less traumatic, perhaps?
I suppose the first one that instinctively comes to my head is, I found out in 2009, and back then autism was very much seen as kind of a bad thing. That the positive autistic identity movements hadn't quite taken off then, so my experience may differ to what people could have now. But so an autistic girl in crisis who finds out she's autistic midway through crisis, yeah, no wonder you make that association with, oh, that means my autism is the bad thing. I mean, not gonna lie, that was me in my 20s when I found out. I suppose you could reframe it as in, you're not having these problems because you're autistic. You're having these problems because you're autistic in a non-autistic world. It's not your brain that is wrong. It's the fact that you are surrounded by people who still have yet to learn how to accommodate brains like yours. And you have to be kind of careful with, for lack of a better phrase, where you place the blame. But I'd say it's marginally more positive to blame society than blame their autism, and it's also a hell of a lot more accurate as well. But yeah, there'll be something in there about, yes, you're autistic, and your autism does have a role in the fact that all this is happening, but it's not caused by your autism. In a world where everyone had brains like yours, these problems simply wouldn't be happening. Make sure it's framed so that autism is not the bad guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, also, the reason that they're in crisis is because nobody has realized that they're autistic. So finding it out in that way can be reframed to a positive. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Right. So we're gonna just go through a few more questions, and then I know we have got quite a lot of questions in the chat, so I do want to get to them. But we wanted to talk about nurturing a self-confident, self-advocating young person. So we want to talk about that, but also in connection with being at school, which obviously can often, well, especially mainstream school, can be quite a toxic place for autistic young people. So how do you nurture that self-confidence, that self-advocating in an environment where perhaps you're not very well understood?
Wow. Okay, so there's little that we individually can do to make school a less toxic environment. What we can do is play to the influences that we do have. And one example is, what opportunities do these children, generally girls, I'm assuming, what opportunities do they have at home to advocate for themselves? And I'm not going to make any kind of assumptions there about what opportunities they do or don't have. That's entirely down to your family's own circumstances. But it's worth asking, okay, so school I'm going to take seriously. Does she have a place where she knows without a shadow of doubt that she is taken completely seriously? And yeah, they say charity begins at home. Maybe self-advocacy does as well. But obviously it doesn't stop at home. It's like, what areas are there outside of home and outside of school that this person can, in fact, you know what, changing subject somewhat, what opportunities do they have to take responsibility for things? Because one of the really big things that I tell people when I'm training teachers or giving talks to parent groups is responsibility massively builds people. At the age of 13, no one could have predicted that I could have been in any way confident or competent as a primary school teacher, or any kind of teacher really. I had no leadership skills, only very rudimentary social skills, and that was through my Boys Brigade. And for those who don't know who the Boys Brigade are, we're the people who invented the Scouts and taught the Scouts how to go camping. And if anyone's offended by that, then I suggest you Google it, because it's true. But yeah, we're a Christian youth organisation, and our aims are quite similar to the Scouts. Big surprise! It's about building up young people, teaching life skills, and everything associated with that. And yeah, 13-year-old me did not have much in the way of, well, zero in the way of leadership experience, not much in the way of social or leadership skills, until my Boys Brigade captain put me in charge of the marching band. And that was an opportunity for me to take responsibility for something. And 10 years later, qualified as a primary school teacher. Now, what I tell groups of teaching staff and parent groups as well is find something non-academic that your child can take responsibility for. And the reason I say non-academic is because children learn 5 days a week what they're supposed to be good at, what they're not supposed to be good at, and so on and so on. And if it's in a school, for example, that responsibility could be as big as running a club with staff assistants, or it could be as small as taking the register to the office at the end of register each morning. In fact, one example I was giving the group of Senkos yesterday was a year 4 lesson when I taught the class I taught the class the alphabet in sign language when I was 9 years old, excuse me. And I still remember that to this day. Decades later, I still remember how special that was. Now imagine the exact same story, but with someone who just does not fit in at school, the kind of child for whom mainstream education is just not designed for. Someone who might have some degree of learning difficulties or social anxiety and so on. Years later, they'll still become the kind of adult who says, yeah, school was a load of crap and I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, but they will forever remember the day they taught sign language to their peers when they were 9 years old. So yeah, find things that they can take responsibility for, things that will either help them to play to their strengths or, like in my case, help them to uncover strengths they didn't even know they had.
Okay, this might be a good question to jump in with then, in that case. What's the best way to get a child engaged in learning that they aren't really interested in? And then after that, you can talk about Rubik cubes.
Oh, cool, thank you. Well, how to engage a child who isn't interested in learning? Well, first question is, why aren't they interested in the learning? What is it about the learning that they are not engaging with? And this is another thing that I was telling the Senkos yesterday about, that stereotype about how autistic people's special interests / obsessions really get in the way of the real actual learning. Well, no, if someone learns best through Sonic the Hedgehog, then teach them maths using Sonic the Hedgehog. I mean, there'll be children out there who are utterly obsessed with Pokemon. Teach them through Pokemon. There's so much maths that you can do through Pokemon. There's so much literacy work you can do through Pokemon. There's so much you can do if you use those special interests or their passions and things they really love as things to teach them the learning through, rather than something to try pulling them away from in order to focus on what really matters. So yeah, if they're not interested in the work, then okay, to be fair, it might just be the case of, oh, I don't like science, so I will not engage with it. That makes things a little bit more difficult. But I'd say that if you want people to be engaged with your learning, persuade them that the learning is worth engaging with. And if that involves invoking their special interest, then do so. Like the example, just for finish, that 17-year-old lad that we had in a school worked at once, who had learning difficulties basically all over the place and struggled with reading and writing, but as you might expect. And one day, well, it was 1 week actually, 1 week, his English teacher ran a whole week of Doctor Who themed lessons. And suddenly it was like he'd become Shakespeare. So yeah, that'll be my main thing. If you know what motivates the students, use that topic as something to bridge the gap between what their interests are and what, as adults, we know that they do need to learn.
Yeah, stop trying to pull them out of their attention tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there I did notice, I probably won't be able to find it now, but I did notice a question in the chat asking you about your Rubik Cube, and it said, is that a, now I'm not going to pretend to know anything about Rubik Cubes, is that a GAN? G-A-N?
Yes, it is.
Oh, there you go.
It's a GAN 356 XS, and I was given it as a gift at the Western Supermare tournaments just this weekend as a thank you for being a co-organizer of one of their tournaments in London. So yeah, this was a gift that I got a few days ago, and it's just, it's a piece of engineering beauty. It's a feather light, and it moves so quickly. And just look how effectively the corner cutting is. Like if you use a Rubik's brand cube, you have to turn it all the way there before you start turning the next one. But with this, you don't even need to turn it the full way. It is just absolutely beautiful. And I know I'm entirely geeking out. So if you want to teach me maths through Rubik's cubes, because that's how I will engage.
Yep, very important. Right, I think I'm going to only ask one more question, and then I'm going to go to questions from the audience. But there was one, well, I'm not going to be able to find it now, am I? There was one question that I really wanted to ask. Oh yeah, how can someone who is particularly demand avoidant get things done without putting pressure on themselves? And I am conscious that this question is in itself a demand.
It's a bit of irony. I'm fully aware, in answering this with personal experience, I'm answering through the eyes of executive dysfunction rather than demand avoidance. But I'm wondering whether there's something in between here. So some days I wake up and I have 40 messages to get through, and my first instinct is, oh bloody hell, there is absolutely no way I'm going to get through this, and then spend the whole day worrying about how I'm clearly not going to get through this, and then finish the day feeling guilty about, oh, for some reason I didn't even get through this, didn't even answer like 3, 4, or 5 of them. So what I do is I break it down into minuscule tasks. In my case, I answer an email, solve speed solve Rubik's Cube, try and see how fast I can do it. Then I answer another email, then I speed solve a cube. Then answer another email, speed solve a cube. Now, if you walk through the door while I'm at work, there's about a 50-50 chance that you'll see me solving Rubik's Cube rather than answering my emails. But that's okay, because trust me, that is so much more productive than if I just put the cube down and said, no, you can have that at 5. Well, no, who am I kidding? I don't finish at 5 p.m. I usually finish at about 9. But no, you can have that in the evening when the important stuff is done first. I just stare at the screen and get nothing done. So, yeah, it sucks trying to catch up on 30 messages at the same time. Even if I like the people, like they're friends sending me messages, and I really enjoy talking to these friends, but it is still, well, okay, maybe I'm a bit demand avoidant, but there's so much to do, and one of the things that helps you get through it is the fact that I value speed solving this far more than I fear or want to avoid getting my work done. So learn what motivates you, and if you're able to use that as a reward for yourself, then yeah, do so. And again, I know that's more executive dysfunction rather than demand avoidance, but that's the answer I have from my personal experience.
Okay, right. So let's go to some of the questions that have been put in the chat. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to go through them in order because Vicky has very kindly collated them for me. And the first one is, what age are the books aimed at?
Okay, well, first off, thank you for asking. Secondly, my stock answer to the age question is, I generally say it's age 12 plus, but I do catch the occasional 10-year-old reading it. And I think once I heard about a 9-year-old reading it as well, but generally speaking, it's about 12 plus. Basically, if you can cope with the Hunger Games, you can cope with Underdogs. And it also has one other thing that in common with the Hunger Games in the fact that it may have been written for teenagers, but a slim majority of its readers are adults. Again, much like the Hunger Games.
The Hunger Games, I think, is a really good example of that. I remember the first time I read The Hunger Games, I thought it was fantastic, and I was definitely an adult.
My
Right,
brother-in-law lent me a copy that I started reading it at 5 in the evening, and when it reached about 12 o'clock, I decided, you know what, no, I'm not going to bed until I've done this. So that there was reading through, and obviously we know what The Hunger Games is about. It's like 24 teenagers being forced to fight to the death. So there was my spreadsheet of who, which characters from which districts and which names we knew of each of them, and blacking them out as they went, and who'd finished 24th, who'd finished 18th, and so on. Yeah, I'm a massive nerd, of course, but I finished it at 3 in the morning, and yeah, read it literally in one go across one day. Starting at 5 in the evening wasn't the best idea, but it was absolutely worth it because it makes a funny story years down the line. And yeah, I think that's when you know you've written a good book, when you get people like me totally nerding, but actually no, it's geeking out rather than nerding out. Nerding is academic stuff, geeking out is not necessarily academic stuff. Like, I'm a nerd for maths, but I'm a geek for Rubik's cubing. Anyway, I'm digressing a lot, but well, everything's interesting to talk about, so who cares?
Yeah, I think if you finish a book and you're sad that you finished it because you want to read it again, that's a sign of a great book. Okay, so the next one is, what would be a great career for a former special education teacher who is autistic but couldn't stay employed in that type of environment?
So it's like you're talking about me then. Except for the bit where, well, I would, and by the way, please do not interpret this as, well, how do you know that the job's not right for you? Because if you know it's not right, then you know it's not right. But one thing that I do feel morally compelled to say is, it is worth considering whether it is the case that you cannot work in special education environments in general, or whether it is literally just that particular school that doesn't work for you. Because schools are different. It's like when people ask me, do you think that mainstream education is best for an autistic child, or special education, or homeschooling? My answer is always, well, which autistic child? Duh. But I don't say the duh because that's massively patronizing, but among people who presumably know as well as I do that it really does depend on the individual. Yeah, that's my opinion. But also, one thing that needs to be said as well is it also depends on the school. So there'll be some schools that are autism specific and a perfect fit for your child, others that are autism specific and, well, no, keep your child away from there. Exactly the same with mainstream schools as well. So yeah, so for now, let's make the assumption that this person doesn't feel able to work anywhere in special education, despite having been a teacher there. It would be enormously presumptuous of me to suggest anything at all without knowing the person. So please do not take my advice as gospel truth. I suppose I'm trying to find a non-corny, non-stereotypical, or non-cliched way of saying, follow your heart, pursue your dreams. I would say, play to your strengths. Oh yeah. You may have noticed how often I take a sip. It's because I'm obeying the rules of the Autistic Not Weird drinking game. Now, the Autistic Not Weird drinking game was invented a long time ago by my Patreon supporters, and the only one that seems to be relevant these days, the one that gets remembered, is take a shot of water, obviously. Take a shot every time Chris says, play to your strengths. And I make no apologies for making lots of people very drunk on water, because it's just about the most important bit of advice I can give to autistic people, including those who are leaving one career and going into another. So I'd say either, well, actually, maybe it's not either or, just do as many of these things as you sensibly can. Know what you're good at or could become good at, and also understand what you have a passion for and what you would readily do. I think I heard this phrase once. I think it was in a movie, actually. True genius is getting paid for something you would readily do for free. And I'm not saying I'm a genius or anything, but most things that I've ended up being paid for professionally were once upon a time things I was doing voluntarily. So yeah, it's a good way of determining which things you actually would want to do. and also either you would be good at, or you could actually become good at given experience.
Okay, right. So the next question is, did you find being open about being an autistic teacher affected how you were viewed?
Yeah, tough question. Well, no, not a tough question. I know exactly what the answer is, but it's a complex topic to talk about. And I'll say sometimes, well, okay, all of the time, yes, but it's just whether it's positive or not. And some of the time, no, most of the time, yes. And all in all, it was definitely worth it, because the alternative was, well, trying to pretend that I wasn't autistic, and everyone either working it out anyway because they're teachers and they're kind of getting a bit good at spotting that kind of thing. But yeah, or successfully tricking people into thinking you're not autistic. So what is wrong with that person then? So yeah, being open about it, especially in that autism specific school in which I was first open about it, everyone had pretty much already worked out I was autistic, so I might as well just be open with it. A couple of negative examples, that there was this one teacher who would, and I was a TA in this school. I had been a mainstream primary school teacher. I became a TA in this special school because I wasn't sure whether I wanted to teach my own class again. And one of the teachers I worked under set off the students on this class and then would turn to me and explain the thing again with the same slow voice and the same intonations that she talked to the disabled students with. And she spoke slower than that, so I just can't speak slower than that. But yeah, that was that. And also, when I ran chess clubs in mainstream education, I was known as Mr. Bonnello the chess geek, and that was great. I loved that reputation. When I did the same in special education, there were a small minority, and it was a minority of staff thought, oh yeah, that's just Chris's autistic obsession. I mean, Chris is only bringing chess into the school because it's his own personal obsession and he wants to apply it everywhere in his life. Like, no, actually, I have seen the benefits that teaching chess can give to autistic students and non-autistic students as well. I've seen exactly how effective a tool it is for building up young people. That is why I love chess. It's not just something that can be reduced to, oh, it's Chris's autistic obsession. I mean, yeah, it was my autistic obsession, but that wasn't what it was doing in the school. Anyway, having presented a couple of negative examples, generally speaking, it helped because I was able to be authentic. I no longer felt the need to hide the actual person that I was. And I wish I could say, oh yes, everyone should be open about their autism if they work in a school, especially a special school. But it really depends on the staff team you're with, and it depends on the individuals that you work with. In my personal experience, there have been far more positives than negatives. But bear in mind that I spent plenty of years only telling the people who needed to know, like head teachers or NQT mentors, and maybe another member of staff if I really trusted them. So yeah, it's been kind of a career of two halves for me, one in which I kept my autism a very closely guarded secret, and the other in which I was very open about it. There's advantages and disadvantages to both, but by far the most advantageous was when I was open about it. But that's because I was surrounded by good people.
Okay. The next question is, do you have a set phrase to explain I am autistic and it means? And then it says, my 10-year-old isn't able to explain to peers, and adults often say, but she's autistic. Oh, there's my little pet hate there.
I'm afraid I didn't hear that last bit. And parents say what, sorry?
My 10-year-old isn't able to explain to peers, and adults often say, but she doesn't look autistic.
Well, I won't quite go with the one that the internet seems to like, which is, oh, I don't look autistic. Well, you don't look ignorant, but here we are. I would not recommend that because I think that alienates people. But depending on how well you know the person, you can be a bit sarcastic. Like a friend of mine who responds with, "Oh yeah, we keep her second head tucked in her trousers." But
I think they're asking, what can the 10-year-old child say in that
got it.
situation?
Thank you. Right. So, I would love to say it depends on the relationship that they have with that person, but I'm guessing that it's in like moments of borderline crisis where they just need to reach for a stock sentence that's in their memory bank, because that's what I do. Give me an example situation, and I'll try to answer as if I were the 10-year-old.
Okay. The 10-year-old is I don't know, starting brownies. I can't remember what age you start brownies at, but the 10-year-old is starting brownies, and she perhaps actually it doesn't say whether it's a girl or a boy. She doesn't say, she might need to say to her brownie peers that she's autistic.
Okay. In the concept, okay. So, wait, what? Oh, okay. I would say that sometimes you need a long and detailed explanation for things. Sometimes you do not. Sometimes it sounds like, I was about to say, oh, sorry, it's because, but well, also bear in mind whether it's something that actually needs apologizing for. Like, it could be something like, oh, I'm autistic, so I interpret sounds differently. Or I'm autistic, which means sometimes I struggle with loud noises. I think you don't need a long explanation, but it could help if you give a specific explanation. Like literally what I just said, I'm autistic, which means I struggle with loud noises. I mean, you don't need to go into great long details about, so actually the brain of an autistic person or someone with sensory difficulties would hear sounds louder than the general population hears them, and this means that you don't need to go into that. Children can understand one sentence explanations of, I mean, what do you want them to learn from it? Do you want them to learn everything there is to know about autistic sensory issues, or do you want them to know, I'm struggling, or please accommodate me? So yeah, something like that gives a one sentence description rather than explanation, because there's a difference between a description and explanation. An explanation is, I struggle with loud sounds because this, that, and the other. A description is, I'm autistic, and that means I struggle when the fire alarm goes off. So yeah, if their friends want a conversation about it, you can have a conversation about it. But in the immediate term, when you're just trying to get the other guides around you to understand where you're coming from, a one sentence explanation that just gives the straight facts and throws in the word autism as well, that's enough for that particular moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the next question is, how do you support your autistic child who is asking why they are different and can't be like everyone else? And how do you support them through anxiety?
Get them to meet other autistic people, or let them know that other autistic people are out there and the fact that they're not alone. Because, and the way that sentence was phrased, why can't I be like everyone else? Well, why would you want to be? I don't mean that rhetorically. I mean, it is worth asking yourself, why do you want to be? Is it because everyone else is much better than you at this, that, and the other, which, to be fair, might actually be one of their reasons? Or is it simply because you don't want to be judged? Because sadly, a lot of autistic people out there do actually wish for a cure for their autism, not because they don't like being autistic, but just so that other people would judge them less. And it's tragic, really. But yeah, in order to help with that issue, I would recommend find autistic friends, autistic adult role models, and introduce them to autistic internet celebrities. Or that guy who invented Pokemon. Did you know he's autistic? But even things like that. And oh yeah, that acting in that film that you like. Did you know that they're autistic? So yeah, exposure to other autistic other autistic people is something that is massively valuable. And if you can have actual real life face-to-face autistic friends as well, then yeah, so much the better.
Yep, absolutely. And the second part of the question was, how do you support them through anxiety?
Yes. Depends what they're anxious with and what the anxiety looks like when it's there. And bear in mind that sadly, the vast majority of autistic people do struggle with anxiety. A little bit of context behind that. Sometimes the autistic brain is neurologically wired to be more susceptible to anxiety, but not always. Sometimes anxiety is a perfectly natural human reaction, autistic or not, to growing up being made to believe that you don't belong or that you're not the way you're supposed to be and so on. Like, these days, I don't struggle with anxiety even a tenth as much as I used to, and it's something I'm massively grateful for. But even during the days when I really did massively struggle with anxiety, even then I knew that my brain wasn't more naturally susceptible to anxiety than the general population. My anxiety was done to me by other people. That doesn't answer the question in the least, but it's at the very least provides some context to why autistic people are so anxious. So how to help people deal with anxiety. I suppose the most important thing, and I hope it doesn't come across as patronizing, but ask them. What I mean is, and this was telling the Senko yesterday, if you have a child who's struggling in class, then you ask, what's wrong? And then they don't answer. Well, big surprise. Of course, they're not going to be able to answer. By the time it's really that visible that something's wrong, they could have lost their ability to speak. So what I suggest, and I suggest this to parents too, is have a chat with them about those situations at a time when they're completely fine. Like, so, last week when such and such happened, what should I have done? Well, what helps you in that kind of situation? And I know we're talking about very specific anxiety incidents here rather than just generally feeling anxious, but it's well, it popped in my head, so I thought I'd say it. If you want to help to accommodate someone in the actual moments that they're feeling anxious, have a talk to them about it while they're feeling completely fine, and when they do have their words and when they can express what it feels like.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So the next question, I'm just going to paraphrase it a little bit. It's talking about being on the waiting list for assessment, and obviously some waiting lists are very, very long at the moment. When do you suggest telling kids, do we wait for the diagnosis, or they're particularly worried that their son is really good at masking and so he may get missed during assessment? When do they start discussing possibly being autistic with him?
That makes sense from what I was saying earlier. Bear in mind, the child is autistic whether they get the diagnosis or not. It could well be the case that they spend 2 years being taught everything about their autistic identity, and then some numpty at the other end with a bunch of fancy letters after his name says, oh yeah, well, you're not like that 11-year-old boy who I diagnosed with autism last week, so no, you're not autistic. It might be the case that you don't get the diagnosis, but that doesn't make them less autistic. And I would say that it's, as understandable as it sounds, I do think it's kind of irrational to think, okay, well, I can tell that they're struggling, but I'm going to wait for someone else to give their permission for me to call them autistic. So I'd say, yeah, talk to them about what the assessment is about, if it's practical and if it's appropriate and if it's accessible. But I would make the decision on whether to tell them that they're autistic completely independently of where they are in terms of diagnosis, because then you're entering areas that are beyond your control. You're waiting for another person to give the child what they need. And I don't think I need to tell people here that often that wait can be unacceptably long, so you don't want to give the power to those people when you could be helping your child to understand their autistic identity basically now. Okay.
Right, so the next question, it's quite a long question, but I think I do need to read it out.
Okay.
Do you think it will get easier for parents to tell their children that they are autistic when family members in previous generations are already known to be autistic? I got my diagnosis aged 58 My son, a few months later, aged 31, and my granddaughter is awaiting assessment now. I'm hoping the fact that her papa and granny are autistic will help her to feel okay about being autistic herself.
Yes. But yeah,
Okay.
to give more details, obviously, yes, I do think it'll become easier to tell people that they're autistic. Well, honestly, I feel in general it's going to become easier, because the one of the big difficulties in recent times about telling people that they're autistic is because, like I said, autism is supposed to be a bad thing. That's the first thing you learn about autism, and if you want it to be easier to tell young people they're autistic, change public perception of what autism is. Make sure that what they witness about autism, it's like those parents who send me messages about told my teenager they're autistic, but they're refusing to have anything to do with it. They've never accepted their diagnosis. And well, why not? Possibly because the rest of the world is telling them that that autism is a bad thing, and it's not something I want to be. But yeah, that's kind of a separate issue. The fact that the more autism accepting society in general becomes, by knock-on effects, the easier it will be to tell young people they're autistic. Even more so with the example that was just given in that question, I think that you don't even need society itself to change in order for the news breaking to be made easier in that way. The fact that, like I said earlier on, the more you can personalize an autism explanation, then the quicker that the young person may connect with it and become accepting of their autistic self. And one of the things that really personalize it is that, oh yeah, I had that diagnosis when I was younger. So in answer to your question, yes, and I think that will actually be a much bigger factor in the breaking of the news to be made easier than wider autism advocacy in general.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think you might like the next question. If autism was the dominant neurotype and neurotypicality, well, that's quite difficult to say, was rare, do you think that autistic people would be protected from common mental health difficulties such as autistic burnout or OCD?
Well, I remember at the beginning when I said one of the most difficult things about being autistic is the fact that the world is generally built for non-autistic people. If we were the majority, then we that basically wouldn't be an issue. We wouldn't see it. In fact, yeah, before I answer that question with literally what I'm thinking, a bit of a context as to what accommodations really are. When you ask people what are accommodations, what does it mean to accommodate an autistic person, then the general gist of the answer you get is, oh, it's when you do special things for an autistic person. And the curious thing is, what we don't talk about enough is the fact that it's only called accommodations if you're doing it to an autistic person or a dyslexic person or someone who thinks differently, someone who's not neurotypical. The whole of the world is already accommodating the neurotypical population. When you build an entire society that, by its very nature and just by the way that things are done, accommodates everyone with the neurotypical mindset, that is called normality. When you make that exact same world accessible for an autistic person, that is called special treatment. So just remind me what the question said, because there was a reason I said all that.
Hang on. Would autistic people be protected from common mental health?
That's it, yes. Yes, I think autistic people would be protected from things like that for the same reason that in this world, non-autistic people are, generally speaking, protected from the consequences of dropping hints instead of saying what they're supposed to say. You can get away with dropping hints if 98% of the human population does it. And yeah, if autistic people were the majority, the whole of the world in general would have been built up to accommodate autistic people to start with anyway.
Okay. Right, so finding out as a young adult, how did you go about finding strategies, etc., that worked for you and feeling comfortable to use these in education or the workplace?
How did I go about finding strategies that worked for me? And what was that very last bit?
Feeling comfortable to use the strategies in education or the workplace.
I suppose a part of it would depend on the workplace and whether it was a comfortable place to use those strategies. Because, well, you could come up with the best coping strategies that have you written all over them, the ones that are absolutely perfectly designed for you and your brain. But the question would still remain: are you in an environment that would accept those strategies for you? Do you work in a school that doesn't mind you just casually solving a Rubik's Cube in the middle of your maths lesson because it helps you to concentrate, for example? Anyway, in terms of how I discovered them, like pretending for a moment that the environment that you're in just 100% accepts whatever you do within reason. A bunch of it is trial and error. It's like there are plenty of things that I've tried and just don't work. It's like one thing that I believed was helping me with my anxiety was take some blue tack and just roll it around in my fingers. Now, for a lot of people, that works. If you want to try it, yeah, go for it. For me, it basically ended up stiffening my fingers so I couldn't really do anything with them, and the thoughts were still swirling anyway. But it was worth giving it a go just so I know whether or not it worked. So, yeah, I'd say trial and error. Try as many different strategies as you want, and if one sticks, keep using it.
Brilliant. Okay, so the next question is, do you think seeking a diagnosis later in life is worthwhile? Going through the assessment process with my son has made me realize that I think I'm autistic too. It's been a huge revelation and very positive for me, but will I gain anything from formal diagnosis above self-diagnosis? This is something that comes up very often in the Facebook group.
Yep. It is surprising, isn't it, how many parents only learn they're autistic once their child is diagnosed. It's like, wait, that's an autistic thing? I just thought it was a normal thing, because it's always been normal for me.
Well, yeah, because your normal is your normal.
Yeah, and reminds me of a friend of mine who comes from a family who grew up in a part of the world where neurodiversity awareness, certainly back when she was growing up, and to an extent now as well, just wasn't massively prioritized or particularly respected. And her mother was full of protest when my friend's 3-year-old daughter got diagnosed with ADHD, and so she said to my friend, "And how come that this little girl has been diagnosed with ADHD?" Well, it's because she does this, she does that, and so on. And then her mum hilariously answered, "Well, if that's ADHD, then I must have ADHD, because that's what I do." And she meant that as some kind of counter argument, but isn't it hilarious when people accidentally stumble across the entirely correct answer? Anyway, so yeah, the original question. Just remind me what the question was. Apologies.
Will there be any positive gain from a formal diagnosis?
It really depends what you want from it. I knew all along when I went for my diagnosis at the age of 25. Yeah, 25. I knew all along that I wasn't going to get anything in the way of formal help for it. But that really wasn't what I was aiming to get from it. What the diagnosis did for me was it helped me to make peace with myself, and it helped me to understand that I wasn't the wrong kind of person just because I wasn't like everyone else. And yeah, more than that, it actually helped me to recognize that all those things that I was doing to make myself look less autistic, that wasn't fixing me, that was actively damaging me. And yeah, for that alone, the autism diagnosis was absolutely worth it. I suppose I should also say that back in 2009, I had little to no autistic friends, and certainly wasn't part of the autistic crowd online. I wasn't part of any autistic Facebook groups and so on. It was very much me on my own, plus the occasional person that oh yeah, they're autistic, but I don't really want to talk to them about autism. So it could be the case that some self-diagnosed people don't need to go for a formal diagnosis because they've already made peace of who they are through interacting with the wider autistic community. But in terms of whether it's worth it, that's entirely up to you. I would suggest, in fact, yeah, go again to autistic.weird.com/all, and somewhere down the list is an article about navigating the diagnosis journey as an adult. And yeah, one of the first things to say in that is that, yeah, if you want to get a diagnosis, then have an understanding in your mind as to why you want the diagnosis, just so you're clear in your own head what you're doing it for. So is it worth it? Well, that's entirely up to you. It was worth it for me.
Okay, right. My brain has confused the questions somewhat, so I'm now not sure if they're in order anymore, but I'm going to just push ahead anyway. So the next question is, my daughter is experiencing autistic burnout, exhausted by the demands of GCSE year. As a successful professional, we are watching you and would like to know what strategies you employ to cope with or anticipate or manage autistic burnout in the workplace.
Okay, very important point here. I can give plenty of insight into managing burnouts, but when people ask me how do I manage autistic burnout, I immediately start with this disclaimer. I'm not suggesting I do it well. So with that little disclaimer out of the way, thing is, when I talk about autism and autistic burnouts, I often think about it from the perspective of like me as an autistic or autistic adults in general. But to be fair, doing GCSEs, I think a lot of stuff works for older teenagers that would also work for adults. So it's just the same thing anyway. I would say setting boundaries for yourself is a good thing. For example, I refuse to take appointments at the weekends unless it's for someone who is a like really personal friend of mine and they cannot make anyone else. So I do grant this one exception for a friend/patron supporter of mine who lives in Australia, because time zone differences and work and things, it's the only time we can do it. But with the exception of him and like close personal friends, I do not take appointments at the weekends. I lose a bit of money from that, but I do get to keep my sanity. And it's a fair trade-off, really. And also, when I was GCSE age, to be fair, I was also the kind of person who would spend 6 hours designing a study timetable, a day and a half of following the study timetable, and then the next day I'd spend another 6 hours designing another study timetable. But yeah, I am one thing that I can't remember whether or not it did this, but I'd really encourage anyone to do the same. Kind of hoping that I did. But when you're designing your exam revision timetable, remember to put in breaks and actually stick to them. Just occasionally, in fact, yeah. One thing I do, which does not solve burnout, but at least keeps it at bay for a little bit longer, I schedule my days hour by hour. Like 10 to 11, answer messages to Autistic Not Weird. 11 till 12, plan my next lessons. 12 to 1, have lunch, do such and such. And occasionally, when I remember, like 3 p.m. to 4 p.m, sleep. And yeah, I think it's very easy to fall into the bad habit of thinking, nope, you're awake, which means you need to be working. Or, no, it's the daytime, the sun is out, that means you need to be working. I think we need to, and especially with GCSE revision as well, find a timetable that works for you. These are your qualifications you're going for. Nobody else has the right to have any influence over what methods you use, because they're not the ones who are taking the exams for you. So use whatever strategies work for you. If you need to only do 1 or 2 hours of work a day, and that's all we can do without burning out, then do only 1 or 2 hours of work per day and avoid burning out. There's a lot of stuff in there, so I hope some of it was useful.
And I'm going to jump in there a little bit as well, actually, because I've got 2 autistic teens, and one of whom is in GCSE year and the other one who's done them. And I would say it probably depends on how long your child has been diagnosed. If they only found out they were diagnosed very recently, then they probably haven't got so far along that, I hate this word, but journey. And they're probably still learning quite a bit about self-advocating for themselves, and that will come, but it takes some time to come. But it's, as you know, as Chris just said, from his adult point of view, that is probably the most important thing, is being able to self-advocate and recognizing your boundaries. And it's hard as a parent, it's hard because you know that they should be or need to be, or you want them to be doing certain things, but that's not always possible. And so I think you need to get this balance between the things that they have to do and listening to them about their boundaries and their, you know, when they've really had enough. Or actually, you don't even want to get as far as they've had enough. What you want them to be able to do is to recognize that they've almost had enough, and to build in as Chris said, about taking breaks, etc., before they get to that point. So, you know, I do think that it's something that comes, but it doesn't come straight away, and it's going to depend when they were recognized as autistic. Okay, so next question, and we haven't got time for very many more, so I don't think we're going to cover them all, I'm afraid. How is best to approach teachers about your child's needs when they don't seem to be receptive? Sensory problems especially are huge, but my daughter's school don't seem to get that.
The difficulty in answering this question is that it depends on things that are outside of my control and outside of your control, because the teacher could just choose to be completely stone dead ignorant. So yeah, there's that kind of limitation to how well I can answer this question, really. The fact that sometimes ignorance is a choice, and if they choose to be ignorant, there's not much you can do about it. With that said, how much room does the child have to do some of that self-advocacy we've just been talking about? And obviously, in the middle of struggling, well, presumably not much, even if they were allowed to. But would the child have an opportunity to just personally tell the teacher, or write a letter to the teacher describing, I'm autistic, which means sensory issues, this, that, the other, and I do not cope. Yeah, the more specific you can be, the better. I struggle to work when there's a buzzing light, or I can't focus when Darren is tapping his pencil on the table. Things like that. If there's an opportunity for them to self-advocate, then that could help a lot, because schools are very hit and miss when it comes to listening to parents, and some schools are great at some really aren't. Some are really great at listening to some parents, but the moment they have the actual child saying, I need help with this, I need support, and you know what, this is how you can support me, that's when they stop running. That's when they no longer have an excuse to selectively listen. Beyond that, I could say refer them to autism information websites, but of course there's no guarantee that the teachers would spend their free time actually reading those sites. I get the occasional message from parents who say, in fact, they don't say first off their parents, they say, would you like to come and deliver some training at this school? And, oh yeah, brilliant. These are my rates. This is the travel expenses. What kind of thing do you think your students would, your staff could benefit most from hearing about? Oh, well, I'm not a member of staff. I'm a parent, and they're just not listening to me. So I thought I'd recommend you as a trainer to them. And a lot of the time I'm thinking, okay, I know from experience that they're unlikely to think, oh yeah, let's hire Chris Bonnello, because that parent who keeps bugging us kept recommending him. It's complex and it's difficult, and often it's downright ugly. But if you have stuff down in writing, whether it's from you or whether it's from the child as well, then that may not literally fix their attitude, but it means that they can't deny that they have had the information, and they equally cannot deny their responsibility to act on it.
How do you feel about student passports in this kind of situation, Chris?
Student passport, as in hold up a card that says, I need to leave the room because of sensory issues.
No, I'm thinking that's kind of more a timeout card. I'm thinking of, I don't know if you know Gareth Morwood, his kind of at Priestnall's school, they designed a student passport which said those kind of things that you mentioned before. You know, I find it difficult when, or my strengths are, that kind of thing.
Oh, yes, I now know exactly what you mean. Yes. Yeah, I think those are very good. Again, one of the things that you don't control is how much the pupil passport gets read. But then again, it's better to kind of adapt a quote from Al Capone, who once said, you can get further with a kind word and a gun than you can with a kind word alone. I'd say you can get further with a kind word and a medical diagnosis and a pupil passport than you can with a kind word alone.
Okay. And I think this might need to be the last question. And it's about transition to secondary school, which is kind of close to my heart because we did research on it last year. Yep. And this particular person says, I've been told my child has no chance of getting a non-mainstream placement for secondary, but they have really strong sensory issues, already has some absence from school. She's dreading secondary school. Are there things that she could suggest to the secondary school team which could facilitate that transition?
Oh, yes. Sorry to hear that. You are absolutely not alone in being that position. It's really sucks, but yeah. I'd say perhaps the most important thing you can do at this stage is build up the strongest relationship with the secondary school staff that you can. Like, for example, I talk to parents occasionally who are very worried about their child starting year 7, and I say, well, have you had an opportunity to visit the school? No, we've not had a chance. Could you ask to visit the school? Well, you can do that. And well, yes, just give the school a call and say, my child's starting at your school. They have these particular needs. I'll leave it up to you as to whether you say they're feeling very anxious about starting at your school because, well, first impressions and everything. But then again, that kind of first impression might actually be what the child needs in order to have their needs immediately understood. But yeah, you can visit the school before you start, and maybe you've done that already. But anyway, my overarching point is the fact that one of the best things you can do that is within your control is build up positive relationships with the people who are going to be working with your child. Be in contact with the school that they're going to be going to, and ask them questions. How, what can you provide? What have you provided before? And what would your approach be if my child, etc., etc. And through that, you can initiate a discussion on what has worked in the past with your child. And it's especially good if you're able to talk to the actual individual staff members who'll be working with, rather than the head teacher who may or may not end up passing that information onwards. But yeah, what the school can do, that's something that's you'll need to ask them, and the answer may or may not be what you want to hear, but at least you will know what you're up against. The best thing that can help things to stand a chance of going in your favor is developing those relationships. Absolutely.
I've just put a link in the chat, which is an article which was about the research that we did last year on transition to secondary, and we looked at 17 case studies. There were only 4 successful transitions, but they were all of the 4 who had a really bespoke planned transition. So I would say try and do that. And actually, I'm in the act of doing that at the moment for my daughter's transition to college. it's not really, college is not really a suitable placement for her, but it's the only post-16 provision in the county. And so we are currently planning that transition, and actually the colleges are being really, really good about it, and they are open to a very, very bespoke transition with weekly visits if she wants from now. I mean, it's GCSE year, so I don't really want her leaving school every week, but you know, if it's possible, then they will do it. So I think you just need to talk to the school and see what's possible. That's the best thing to do. Okay, right, we're going to need to leave it there because it is 9:30, and so I will I've got book 3 here, and I will be sending that to some lucky person that I will get. I don't know, I'll get my daughter to pick a name or something. So yeah, if you do want to be added into that draw, then do put in the chat that you would like the book, and that I have permission to contact you from your email that you will have put into Eventbrite. I'm not completely sure that fulfills GDPR rules, but at least that's permission anyway. And thank you very much to Chris for giving up his time tonight and teaching us all about everything that he's done. One thing that I've just realised that we haven't talked about very much, and you might want to, is the survey. So do you want to give a quick plug to the survey?
I suppose the best thing you can do is post my own link in the chat, which is, you know, how occasionally if referenced articles are written, they're all accessible from that link there, autistic.weird.com/all, and the section at the top is basically the most well-read articles, and all the ones that people are generally more likely to find most useful. And earlier today, literally a few hours before this started, I uploaded the results of the 2022 Autistic Not Weird Autism Survey. I ran a survey for autistic people, parents of autistic people, and professionals, and basically over 11,000 people responded, which gave me a hell of a lot of data to analyze. And I've spent the last few months analyzing data, producing loads of geeky charts, and basically to come to a consensus on certain autism-related things. Because if you have poisonous charities saying, oh, loads of autistic people want to be cured, well, here's some data, actually analyze data from someone who does have a maths degree. I do have a personality, don't worry, but I do also have a maths degree. And yeah, with the aim of actually having some data rather than just anecdotal evidence or what we think intuitively. So yeah, that went up early today, and yeah, feel free to take a look and learn about what's the general consensus is about very important issues from autistic people and parents and all etc.
And I haven't had a chance to have a look yet, Chris. So
oh, well, you've been busy.
Yeah, I've been slightly busy today. Was there anything that surprised you?
Yes, there was one thing that I was expecting is that I knew that autistic people would generally agree with the statement, I find non-autistic people difficult to communicate with at times. What I predicted was that non-autistic people would say the same thing about autistic people. Basically, it was something that I was kind of investigating, whether the Dr. Damien Milton's double empathy problem theory is actually true. The fact that autistic people struggle to understand non-autistic people, but non-autistic people struggle to understand autistic people. It's just seen as an autism problem because there's more of them than there are of us. But the data seems to show, and this is the bit that surprised me / disappointed me a bit, to the point where I'm kind of questioning that whether the results say what I think they do, that yes, autistic people struggle to read non-autistic people. Non-autistic people claim that autistic people are not very difficult to understand and communicate with. But what I'm now asking is, does this mean autistic people struggle to communicate? Or does it mean autistic people are really clear and transparent and easy to communicate with? Is it really still us who have the communication problem? Because yeah, listening is a very underrated part of communication.
Oh, did you see that? Your last survey got quoted at Jessica
brilliant.
Kingsley Publishers Connected by Autism website. So they,
Fantastic.
I mean, really, if you'd have published a day before, they could have quoted your up-to-date survey.
Yeah, I know. It's nuts.
That's all right. We can.
Well, I'm not going
my
to
authors,
make
my
another
editor's
one.
JKP, so I'll tell her.
Oh, thank you. Well, there's plenty of years ahead for this survey to be quoted in various places, but yeah. Oh yeah, thank you, Tricia, for that. That's something that I completely forgot to add to that. The fact that maybe one of the reasons why autistic people, non-autistic people, felt that we're easy to communicate with is because, well, just because you don't find us difficult to listen to doesn't mean that you are correctly understanding us.
Absolutely. Okay, right. Well, we've kept you 6 minutes over, so I'm going to leave it
how dare you.
Here now. I'm going to go and eat my dinner. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Chris, and we will get the recording and we'll put it on our YouTube channel if that's all right with you, Chris. Yep. Although you've already said it's all right, so yeah, hopefully it still is. Okay. Bye everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.